Good afternoon, everyone. Hi there. This time around, I have Marvie, who is an AI expert and expert, and I'm super thrilled to have this conversation with him on everything practical EU AI Act. So welcome to the podcast, Marvie. Great to have you here.
Hi, guys, and thanks, Ivo, for inviting me.
Yeah, Marvie, you guys developed this FABI framework for the AI Act. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is and how it came about?
So FABI is an abbreviation for Frameworks for AI-based Innovation. So basically, this stems from years of experience, or almost a decade of experience, of developing AI medical devices. And like all of our experiences working with regulators and notified bodies in terms of how do we make sure that the AI is developed safe, because there's always the patient safety behind it, right? And still, so that we impose innovation, so we create newer diagnostic treatment methods through AI, right? So these are the very fun stuff that we are dealing with until now. And UI Act is just a way to say the EU regulators, hey, AI is now being introduced by the masses, right? How can we make sure that, similar to drugs and to medical devices, that we still can provide such a quality that enterprises will use? Because at the end, if you think really about the fundamental things, people will always buy the higher quality ones.
What is the difference of this framework to others? And my understanding of it, and I encourage everyone to check it out, is that it is a framework to solving a compliance problem from the view of a technologist and not from the view of how a lawyer would approach it. And that's why I like it very much. Tell us a little bit more about how you came up with this decision tree and how you apply it to different settings, corporates versus product companies. You mentioned medical devices and others in the European Union that are dealing with AI Act and AI use cases right now.
Yeah, so actually the good thing about having a technical background, especially in mathematics and physics, is that you understand algorithm, right? And algorithm has certain patterns, and you mentioned decision tree because there's always like some kind of rule sets. If you do this, then you go to that direction. If you do that, you go to that direction, right? And many people think regulations are just a bunch of text, but if you think about it from a technical perspective, it's actually a bunch of rule-based decisions, right? And if you're a mathematician, if you're a physicist, then you can see, if you read through the entire regulation, like there are some patterns going through it, you know? And it's very, very interesting because, of course, it can be very stifling reading through the entire thing. But if you have this mindset of generating algorithms, then the entire text makes a lot of sense, right? And currently, the UI Act is just very high level. I think over time, once the first AI system are going to be regulated or scrutinized by regulatory bodies, then there will be amendments coming in over the next couple of months or years, right? So it will change over time.
What are the common misconceptions that you think companies have when about the EU AI Act?
Yeah, a lot. Actually, a lot of them are insecurities, because I think many industries are not dealing with highly regulated environments, right? But for me, as a medical device manufacturer or developer, it is totally different, because I see this as a very like a lesser form of compliance. So it's actually easier to implement AI systems under UI Act than AI medical devices, right? So
that's a very interesting perspective. But then consider this: not everyone is, dealing with such a life-impacting technologies as medical devices. Some of these companies, especially startups, are just scraping to get by, compete on a global scale, coming out of the European Union. and there's one more thing that I have to deal with. And you could be negative about it and say, well, it's just, yet another,
Yeah.
cost of compliance imposed
Yeah.
on us. But then looking at your framework, and I again encourage also my listeners to check out your framework afterwards, is there's a very pragmatic way that you can approach it. And then you break it down to something very logical and easy to put into action. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that action is and how you go about? Let's say you're a
So
typical enterprise, mid-sized
yeah.
company, and what do you do about the EU AI Act? Where do you start,
Yeah.
etc.?
So actually, my approach is similar to like lawyers handling legal cases. Is that um, you see what the current state of the art is, how the organization is utilizing their workflow or the processes, right? Because what I understood over the last years or a decade is that if you're very confident of arguing an auditor or a regulatory body that what you're doing is what makes it high quality, or you're like you're making sure that the organization or that you are doing as much as possible to make your product secure, then there's a win-win situation already, right? So I see this always as the regulation itself as some kind of like a safeguard or like a checklist, so that companies can then around that build their sandbox to innovate and to create their systems or their products. And then every time when you are ready to being scrutinized and say, hey, I will get this now challenged by the regulators, that my system is secure enough, also doesn't hurt individual, because at the end, regulations are being developed, designed and developed to to make it secure for the European inhabitants, right? For the European
Right, right,
people.
right. So walk us through a typical project. How would you go about starting from the beginning? What are the first steps that you do with from a company perspective to implement?
So since I came from a development background, I always start from the most fundamental things, is to make sure that the development lifecycle is compliant, right? Every other else is just a secondary thing to do, right? So what I'm going to do is I directly go towards the development team and ask two things, right? How is your development lifecycle works, right? Starting from getting the requirements or writing the plan or some project plan, gathering the requirements, starting from the user and then the system or software. How do you do the development itself? What type of ceremonies or processes are you doing that? How do you verify your software? You validate, and then how do you do releases? So this is like a typical V model lifecycle, which is being used for most of the regulated environments, right? And each of the steps, I'm actually going through if there's any type of records happening, right? Like, because in the compliance, if you don't record things, then you cannot provide evidence, right? And it can be as easy as a checklist of the requirements that you are dealing with for this sprint, right? And then you define certain rules. Okay, like if you um if you have provided like the list of your requirements, then what are the criteria to make it ready for development, right? What are your guardrails? What are your like criteria? As well as, okay, once you have developed it um in the cycle or in the iteration that you set up in the organization, what are the criteria to make it done, right? So these are the things that it's very important to provide evidence that you're
Right,
doing
right, right.
this, especially consistency, right? So like what regulators really don't like is that if you document certain things in totally different ways every time when you do your development cycle, right? So consistency is key here.
Right. So what do you think is that companies don't understand about the AI Act and they're underestimating? Maybe also from timelines, from content. It seems to me that every time we see new regulation, there's, it surfaces on the radar of compliance departments, of certain experts and leaders within the groups of an organization. But then shortly prior to the deadline is where, bad conscience kicks in and people know, okay, we got 2 months to make it. And then we have to adapt systems, processes, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen this with GDPR. We've seen this with most of the other stuff, really.
That's right.
And that certainly applies to, to most organizations. If you're listening and you're not one of those, congratulations, you're a rare exception. How is the case with the EU AI Act? Where do we stand that companies aren't maybe preparing or should be doing more?
The positive thing is about the UI Act is that you have this categorization of risks, right? So I'm sure it will change over time. There will be a lot of amendments, but this is actually one of the key things that you learn about the UI Act is that not every AI would be a high risk, right? And based on the risk categories, there will be a lot of measurements that you need to do. And if you identify that your AI system is a high risk because you do something very critical that can potentially hurt an individual person, then you of course will follow a stringent pathway through making sure that this AI system is as ethical and as quality and secure as possible, right? But if you think about it, similar to any other highly regulated environments, many of the products in the market are actually low risk, right? And the earlier you identify this as you're within the low risk, there's just so less of requirements that you need actually to fulfill or to comply with that.
Right, but then the question is how to identify the elements where you think you're low risk, but then at a second glance you aren't, right? The bad surprises, like, oh, maybe I'm thinking that I'm just integrating some third party, but actually fulfill the requirements to be a, what's it called, a producer or
manufacturer.
Exactly. Or it's, I wasn't aware that I have to label AI generated content. Ooh, sorry. That just, if I done my due diligence, that I would know that in this case I'm producing actual content going to customers. So not just like a process of decision yes and no, but there's content, and that content has to be labeled. Or is there a case where I'm not even aware whether the content I'm producing, even though I label it, I might run into some intellectual property disputes, right, in the European Union. So those are all things that, depending on the industry, might be highly relevant for you, and you still think it doesn't matter, and then you find out, ex post after an audit, or maybe in the extreme case after some sort of a fine from the based on the EU AI Act. And then you have to do your homework. It's going to be a costly exercise.
Yeah, I mean, if you already commit as an organization, right? Like, okay, regardless what our current knowledge status is of how to classify AI systems, at least you already made the decision that, hey, we are aware that we need to at least identify what the classification or what the risks are we, right? As an organization and as the service or product that we are dealing with. And this alone is already powerful for auditors, right? Like, and they always, like, in the first iteration of the external audit for the CE mark, it is always about the management and the commitment of the management, right? They're always scrutinizing about, hey, how do you ensure that you make the entire organization aware that you as a manager are committed to fully compliance and secure and ethical AI, right? Through trainings, through workshops, through vision and statements, through, like all of these are already very powerful. And I always tell my customers in the first um, audit stage that they need to have a pitch, like a visionary pitch to the auditors that say, I am doing the best I can as an organization to put a secure and ethical AI product into the market. And if you have that, then the audit itself, the entire audit that happens, then it's a little bit more less stifled and stressed, right?
Makes sense, because you see now, you walk around some organizations and there's like posters on the wall, hey, we're looking for AI use cases. There's AI competitions going on. Everyone is trying to get the most out of this. And the ethics, and are we allowed to do this? We're going to run into some problems. Are we compliant? That's that should be on the agenda too, right?
Yes, of course.
So,
and I see, so why, and I would always recommend organizations to do that. You need to always have a background check if you want to consume some regulatory services, because that will be one of the biggest requirements that you will have. And one of the things, of course, I see this within a lot of many startups that I supported, it will be that 1/4 or 1/3 of your investments is just going through to regulations and compliance. But if you find the right person coming from the development background instead from the research or from the legal background, then you can really see that that documentation is less, but connecting the dots from the life cycle to the regulation or to the requirement itself is so on the spot, right? So where you can really see the difference between regulatory support that comes from the development background compared to the research or legal background, like how much documentation is.
what are other things specific to the EU AI Act that you'd like to highlight as non-obvious things that people might be missing? Think in a direction, is it really regulating if then else statements? Is it just linear algebra in multidimensional space that's being under regulation? It started out prior to the Gen AI era, right? Then they changed it. They adapted the wording to fit the foundation models, the new reality. So even before they actually, the final text was ratified, then it already changed the law because of the technology leap. Now, how should people think about it now, impacting their initiatives that are started? What's under coverage at all? Am I impacted by the EU AI Act if I'm just doing a regression, some sort of a simple regression model? Is it AI under the AI Act, or is it not? Even though it's some sort of a statistical, statistical software decision making that's taking a decision for the customer. Right? It's touching the customer. Is it AI Act relevant?
That is a very interesting question, actually, because if you really think about it, a very complicated rule-based decision tree algorithm can be already an artificial intelligence, right? If it's so complex enough that you cannot actually really follow the thoughts of that algorithm, right? Or you didn't, but the good thing about EU AI Act is that through this classification, it actually focuses on a defined AI system as a product that the majority of the individual person within European Union can be used, right? So if you already identify that, okay, your AI system is either a standalone AI system that can be used as a product for individual users, or it can be AI used as a service, right? Then there's already a higher impact in which risk category you are, right? And the cool thing about this risk classification of EU AI Act is that the higher the risk you are, the more stringent you need to be in terms of ensuring that your processes are compliant. But then, if you say, okay, a regression, you're using a very easy algorithm to support your service, right? And then the service actually itself, like the consultant is offering, is then the ones who interact with the individual user or the organization, then there's really less impact in that because there's like a human oversight, right? Through it. So um yeah, that is actually really interesting. So that means that risk classification tends to also define already what type of AI systems you are, right? As you can see, like if there's like fraud management or fraud detection systems, like all of this where you try to classify certain certain output, right? You use machine learning to classify output, and then there is a possible ethical aspects on it that can harm an individual, right? Like if an AI would identify spam differently or wrongly, right? Then there's already an indication of a higher risk AI system. And of
Right.
course, you as an organization are always trying to less the burden of the regulatory, while the notified bodies or the regulatory authorities would always try to put you in a higher risk classification. So this is the fight actually between the company and the regulators.
And that's exactly the point where in existing regulated industries, you have all of those guardrails in place already. Like, for example, in banking, there's quite a few rules out there that prevent you from discriminating, giving loans to customers based on if you don't like the color of their eyes. The same applies to insurance. Now, the AI Act comes on top and says, well, you got to be transparent. You got to, control your bias. You got to, have a risk-based approach. And, obviously excluding someone from using your service is a very, major decision that an AI system would be then taking. It would be almost redundant because we have that in place. And the same system that is some sort of a regression model right now, even if you were to change that with whatever other type of AI or machine learning, approach, it still would have the same impact on the customer. Maybe, price them higher, exclude them out of the market altogether. And then the question becomes, how is that not redundant? I'm seriously asking, because in that industry, the rules are in place to protect the consumer. The rules are in place to ensure the marketplace fairness. And is it just for the teams that are doing Gen AI and data science that they have to, deal with this? Or would you propose this to be kind of like, okay, let's review this and maybe map out where we already have, like medical devices was a good example. This is not an industry that wasn't regulated and was waiting for, for the AI Act to come and save the consumer, right? So what's your view on the idiosyncrasies of the AI Act requirements compared to some of these regulated industries that you had a look at?
I actually, if I think about what you're discussing right now, is I see. So I'm a developer myself, so I develop products, right? And usually, like I don't like if innovation is being stifled, but I've seen this around many other, like Europe is very diverse, right? And if you want to put or place a product into the market and there's no regulation superseding other countries, then it's really, really hard to even go to your neighbor place and put your product there because they have their own regulations. The good thing about the European Commission and why they are putting all of those regulations in place, because throughout the years, the decades of collaborating with other countries within European Union, they came up of this kind of service blueprint of how to write regulations so that the majority, or not even all of the European countries, will have like one framework that fits all, so that you can place actually your products within the EU market very fast.
That's a
Compared
very good
to
argument. That's actually a great insight. Saying, okay, you have
yeah,
the legal
and we've
clarity
seen this
to go through
to
Europe.
some newer like for example Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries. Like it's really hard to put products into your neighbor countries because there's just too much of different legal criteria. Like even if you develop a product in the Philippines and you want to place it in Indonesia, although it is the same industry, they have totally different requirements. And it's really hard, right?
But this is also kind of comes back to the point that I was making, that it's not like we have very few rules in place, right? And it doesn't remove existing rules. It just adds a layer on top. It may be standardizing across Europe and across industries, but for what you'd consider the critical cases, say for very few examples, just like across the board face recognition and things like this. But let's say not from a societal perspective, but so much from an enterprise perspective, most of the stuff you'd be doing, there's product safety regulations in place,
Yes.
and there's regulated industries rules in place that ensure the fairness and the security and safety of the business. So you would my understanding from the framework that you guys came up with is that it guides you through, like, you can imagine this is like a visual decision tree where it guides you to the individual steps, and you kind of can go about ensuring this compliance in a structured way, which is what I liked about it. This is kind of the software developer approach, the technologist approach, really, and not the legal, bureaucratic, let's make due diligence for the sake of due diligence approach.
I just give you an example, actually. A couple of months ago, someone wrote me on LinkedIn because they required an advice for CE marking for AI medical device, right? And then we get to know each other, and then they're currently in the research phase, so they are currently doing some clinical trials with the AI, and at some point they want to pursue their CE marking. And he asked me a bunch of questions of, hey, which category we are very unsure, and they just want to have an opinion. And I asked it and I answered it in 3 seconds, where it's like, hey, based on what you're doing, you're within this in vitro diagnostic regulations, right? And he was so stunned because he asked a lawyer before that a couple of weeks ago, and they had to pay like 10,000 euros, right, just to have a statement in what regulations and which categories they are. So you can really see that from a legal and theoretical point of view, that people are actually very insecure in terms of, hey, which category falls a product in general, because from a legal perspective, it could be a lot of stuff, so to think. But if you come from a pragmatic development part, you can really clearly see the pattern, because there are just certain rule based. Like if you deal with human samples, and if you do that, then you are that, right? And if you deal with that, then you are that. So it is really highly recommendable for everyone that does product development, software development, to really dig in deeper into the EU AI Act if your organization or yourself is affected on it, because then you can really see the pattern behind it. and why. And the thing like that you mentioned, Ivo, is that it's not stifling, but it's actually filtering all of the high risk AI systems, right? Everything else, like 80-90% of it, doesn't really require that much, right? Like you need to require some mechanism in your software that clearly states that this is an AI being involved generating certain information, right? Or doing classification if it's not a high risk one, right? So, and I mean, you're already like, when it comes of user experience or usability, you're already doing that, right? And this
Right,
is
right, right,
just putting it into a record. But
right.
the most important thing is that um, the UI Act actually filters high risk and unacceptable AI systems, right? So
Yeah. So there's as soon as you start working with employee data, with customer data, with that kind of stuff, it also makes sense for you to take a more serious approach to risk, right? We definitely don't want to have companies just doing whatever they want with this with no really repercussions, and especially if you have deep legal pockets, right? They can do a lot of damage before it's rectified. So that kind of that part of the regulation definitely makes sense. Puts us on the map as Europeans, saying, hey, those are the standards. You guys have to comply with this. You can you can do just about anything you want, and get away with it. So, but on the other hand, the other side of the coin is that you would have some startups that will struggle, where you
yes,
say,
for
well,
sure.
a third of their or a quarter or a third of their initial budget would be just to ensure compliance. I mean, if listeners from the US or from Asia would just go about laughing, saying, hey, we already have a 30-40% to 20% cost advantage just by not being there. So it is certainly relevant for smaller players, and it's certainly relevant for companies that are that's still in the stage where they're too small to comply.
That's right.
But here's the interesting point. They go ahead and talk to someone like you, and I'd like to encourage my listeners to and viewers to look at your framework, because it is one of the most pragmatic ways to solve it out there, which would still give them a very, very high level of assurance that it is compliant, that you've done your due diligence, that you've gone through the checklist, and that you are not facing a major risk of misusing your AI for cases that aren't handled in a way that the UAX would like
And
to have.
why our approach is going towards empowering developers and the ones who actually knows the product is that if they're confident of um, that they know that what they're doing is actually already towards compliance, then they can convince literally everyone in the organization, especially the decision makers, hey, guys, we know what the regulation is, we know what our product is, and we know how to certify those. So what we only need from you is your commitment to do that. And that's easier to convince rather than going from the top where you have to school decision makers to, hey, what is that? And then they have to, like, it's just a very meticulous process. Of course, at the end, decision makers will always be the sponsor of training, schooling their organization. But that's just my experience that um, rolling it out in an organization is easier if you start from where the foundation is, and that's the development, right? So
Okay, so that really is the key difference. So you're not saying you go to the legal and the compliance team and they start theorizing, you bring some consultants, they start running with checklists, conducting interviews, writing, mapping stuff out, saying, hey, talk to actual people implementing it, go to the developers, explain to them what they should be doing, like what's the kind of transport to them, the legal part, and also an digestible decision tree based, if this, then that, and if this, that, and that, then go here. Otherwise, skip, do not pass, go, do not collect $200 on kind of the Monopoly game rules. But it really is that. So you have a level of understanding, just like you do in a Monopoly game, of the developers or the AI Act. Then they understand why, if it's not about whether the algorithm, like at what level of complexity of the statistics it becomes the AI Act. Like I always joke is that, your random forest will not go sentient, okay? So they will not become the AI that kind of reinvents itself and kills us all. But they might very much fall into the scope of the UI. So because you take an automated decision about something impacting the customers, you might have bias built in, you might have a bunch of other things they need to control for. And starting from the developers, school, teaching them how to go about it. Then you come up with some sort of an output, right? That you also align with compliance and with management, and then kind of bottom up. You arrive at a place where you're like, okay, company A, company B, these guys now are, using the best practices to deal with classifying high risk, to deal with all of the individual sub cases that become more tricky. The other case that we discussed with Peter from Jet Hire is that all of a sudden, like, he was sharing that, his company is impacted by this in a very significant way, because he, provides, candidates screening and job matching capabilities for candidates with AI, which all of a sudden in Europe is like, ultra high risk, right? Even though there's like all the consents and everyone is like, obviously people benefit a lot from that. But all of a sudden he falls into this very, very high risk category. And it's not a medical device. It's just someone trying to get better jobs, and vice versa, people trying to hire better candidates, where the bias is actually removed compared to traditional systems. Where, apply with my name or with your name,
Yeah,
or with
right.
his name, and then you get a much different results than if you're like John Smith or Hans Meyer. So it's and then all of a sudden you have a situation where the UA Act is trying to help but isn't helping at all, actually stifling the exact company that is trying to remove bias and to help. This is just one example, and I always say, well, there are always edge cases, but by working through these requirements in a pragmatic way, more companies can at least know where they stand. Like the example you gave with that medical device company, now knowing which category they really are at, within
But
a few.
but that is actually a good example of that product, right? That AI system that screens candidates, right? Like if you actually believe in your product that actually reduces or removes bias, and within the regulatory pathway or the certification process of this product, that, like, for example, like, at least if the entire executive team is willing to work closely with the regulators to make sure that all of the things are in place, and like the engagement of the management and the executives within the audit phase is so high, then like, it's not about regulators going in and, yeah, you're doing this wrong, but they just want to ensure that your intention is really, really good for the individuals in EU, right? So there are
Yeah,
there are cases.
and that you actually have a plan. That's the first thing.
That's
If you, this is the famous quote. I remember which movie. I think it was Thank You for Smoking, where the guy says, "See, if you argue correctly, you're technically never wrong." So the same applies to various ways where the regulation is kind of like vague, just open to do whatever you want, but adhere to certain principles. Then this is where the consulting companies offer vastly different approaches to solving the same problem. This is where you have gold plating without end, but also where you have certain companies thinking that the problem is solved very easily and you're good, but then you aren't good. And so as a company, as a client on the other side, you always have to do your due diligence. What do you think are some of the timelines that people should be critical about? You're in the details of it. Can you shed some light in terms of, here's where you should stand with the EU Act? Give us a bit of info on the timelines.
So officially, it is that mid 2025, all of the low risk AI systems should be compliant under UI Act, and mid 2026 high risk ones. But in my experience, also for developing AI medical devices under medical device regulations or in vitro diagnostic regulations, these will be prolonged. Because one or a couple of things I have to criticize European Commission is that, and they're doing these mistakes every time. Like literally every regulations that they're putting into the market, they do this every time, and they don't learn from this. Is that when you put in a regulation that affects the entire union, then you also need to provide the resources. It can be that you have enough regulators in place, because, for example, in the medical device regulation, there's not enough regulators. So all of those products that needs to be certified or recertified are now in the waiting list, right? So that means there's a high risk that medical devices cannot be used to patients. So you're actually risking high enough killing more patients into that, as well as fundings, right? Because they already anticipate and learn that every time when a regulation comes in place, then companies need a certain amount of fundings, right? To process and to support that regulation. And there's not enough of that, right? So the thing is, like, they're putting a regulation in place which is vague, but they don't provide the infrastructure, right? So that's the first thing you actually need to do, that you ensure that if you put something in place, that you can actually suffice the entire supply chain, right, of putting a regulated product into the market, right? So yeah, that's the only thing I can criticize. That's right. And always think about impact, right? How is my product will impact an individual person, right? It can be either a service or, and this is ties then to risk, right? So
Here's
this,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm proud. Before we wrap up, let me give you some opinionated stuff on my side and to offer to my listeners. I'd be curious to see what you think. Just like the EU AI Act changed during making because of the advent of Gen AI, I think, and here's my thing, and I'll put online as prediction, and we'll see whether I'm right or not. By the time the actual 26 timeline comes, we will see another change. And that change I predict is the following. It is not highly complicated, custom developed AI systems where you might have done it in the wrong way or introduced bias in your training set, etc. But it'll be the AI agents and service as a software methods where actually the change that I predict is that there will be a serious discussion about how do we tax this. So even though the safety and security aspects are out of the way, you use the models that are EU trained, EU based, EU compliant, EU whatever. It'd still be the case where it'd be like the impact of that use case of you, instead of removing your old RPA, you're bringing new agents in as call center AI workers, as procurement, as compliance AI workers, as general office clerk type of workers working with ERP, CRM systems, and you remove so many FTEs. How do you tax that? So it'll be the tax debate that I think is not happening right now. Let's see if I'm right or wrong. But the EU access, luckily, nothing about this. And
I highly agree. I had this discussion with also one of yeah, like I attended an event 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, and they never mentioned it's very highly implemented, or at least like annotated in UI Act about generative AI, right? And general AI purpose, right? That's what they call it. And they're very focusing about high risk and all of this stuff and ensuring, but like I can really predict that in the next couple of years that the generative AI era would be the masses in terms of AI products that will be in the market. And I think there will be a lot of amendments in terms of UI Act focusing on that direction, right? Or at least some additional documentation which says, hey, you need to, like, there's a second document that states specifically for generative AI. And what I highly also recommend the European Commission for the UI Act is creating a coordination group where you really invite industry experts into making sure that you have within the European Commission also a set of templates, a set of guidelines, a set of checklists in place, right? For those different risk categories, right? And the earlier the better, because then companies, small or big, can like at least have a set of documentation that they can rely to. Because now the majority of them that doesn't have experience in regulated development, they are very insecure, and this insecurity actually propagates throughout certain industries, right? Because people talk, and especially like people with decision making, they are in events together, they discuss on all of this stuff, and the more insecurity, the more the harder it is for, or the higher the resistance, right? And then there will be a lot of lobby, right? And then it would reduce regulations because of the lobby. So I would really highly suggest that the European Commission would, as soon as possible, establish the infrastructure and then create like a coordination group for practicability of the UI Act.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for this. Before I wrap this up, how can people find you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can see me on LinkedIn most of the time. So I'm not an influencer on LinkedIn, but not the same as Evo, of course. But yeah, you can find me there, and under Marvie Demit. And yeah, looking forward to some people approaching me and discuss.
And how about the FABI framework? Do you have it posted somehow online, or where can people find the website?
So we are currently finishing the website. It's FABI.institute. It's still under construction, but we are now finalizing to create our LinkedIn company profile as well. You can find it there under FABI Institute. So yeah, looking forward for people joining us. We will also post a bunch of articles there regarding our frameworks. So you can then see really what the difference is between industry like Capgemini or Deloitte, what their frameworks are compared to ours.
Excellent. Marvie, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, and see you soon. Cheers.
Thank you very much.